it's got nothing to do with the mainstream. It's got nothing to say to education. It's got nothing, no place in our culture. It doesn't touch that culture at any proper point. And how can a story about a Jewish carpenter have any place in the discourse about fundamentals that we've learned from the great philosophers of hundreds of years ago? In other words, you can't be intellectually Greek and Christian. There's no way in which the new ideas can get in. There are certain ideas which Christians are saying are fundamental, like creation of the world by God, which don't become extremely difficult in terms of Greek philosophy. The idea of incarnation also is extraordinarily different. One can see how divine beings might appear to be human, but they wouldn't actually become human. Now, some of these ideas, notably the idea of creation, Jews had to deal with. And you do get Jewish writers of the dispersion. The most famous of them is Philo, who was a contemporary of Jesus and lived in Alexandria, and where many Jews lived, and who is clearly trying to explain biblical ideas in Greek terms. That is quite important in the history of Christian theology, because it's a great effect on some of the early Christian theologians. However, the person I'd just like to mention, and I do wish we had time to look at him in more detail, is a good example of a person brought up in the Greek intellectual tradition. His name is Justin. You may well have met him, Justin Martyr, as a 2nd century figure. He was born in Syria, but spent much of his life in Rome. He has a fairly typical Greek education, where he has learnt the main philosophical schools, and where he goes from teacher to teacher, because he has been inspired by the ideal of Plato that philosophy is not an academic exercise, it's a moral and religious purgation. Because philosophy, the love of wisdom, should lead you to look on ultimate reality. That is, the true end of philosophy is the vision of God. And Justin is looking for that vision of reality, which is what philosophy should be about. But he's aware that in his day at least, it's no longer about that. Philosophy has become a job, a career, a way of making a living. He goes to one teacher who wants to fix the tuition fee in advance, and Justin walks out. If he's so interested in money, he can't be a real philosopher. Because what is philosophy? It is the search for the vision of ultimate reality, which means that you give up all the things which ordinary people look for, like money or power. You keep out of politics, you keep out of money making, because you must be morally prepared for this vision of reality. He goes from school to school and he can't find what he's looking for. Then, and if you want this story, we've got his own account of it in the early chapters of his dialogue with Trifle, which is a discussion with a Jewish scholar, in the early chapters of which Justin describes how he became a Christian. This is a man who is going to through all the schools, and one day he meets and falls into discussion with an old man he's not met before. And Justin gives his account of the discussion. They discuss ordinary philosophical topics, like the nature of the soul. At the end of which, Justin becomes convinced that none of the schools has the key to the quest for ultimate reality. Is his quest then useless? No, because the old man has introduced him to another literature. And what he's introduced him to is the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Old Testament. He introduces him to the prophets. And Justin finds that these prophets lived before some of the great philosophers. That Moses, for instance, was long before Plato. In other words, here is an alternative classics. And it's as old as the classics and older. You can't brush it away as something that happened the day before yesterday. It's the Old Testament in Greek that grabs Justin. Only by that means can he be led to read the Gospels, when the old man shows to him that the words of the prophets are fulfilled in the Gospels. Justin couldn't have come through the gate of the New Testament. He wouldn't bother to read it. It's only 100 years old, at oldest. It's the writings of the prophets that lead him to the Gospels and thus to the Gospel. Now, the gate to the gate to understanding the Greek term for it was an experience, metanoia. Is the word we get metabolism from. It means change. I think it's the real Greek word for conversion. But it's a conversion of particular sort. It's the moment when you change from wisdom to from folly to wisdom. The moment when the puppy's eyes are opened and it actually sees, because you pass, there's no middle point between folly and wisdom. Metabole is what Justin receives, and he says, Euthius, immediately a fire was kindled in my soul, and a love of those men who are called prophets, that lead him to the words of the Saviour, which have a terrible power to move people from the path of folly and wickedness, and afford sweet consolation to those who do good. Justin finds in Christ what he's looking for in the philosophical schools. And he reaches the experience of metabole, as we would say conversion, through the means of the scriptures, but particularly the Old Testament. He spends the rest of his life teaching philosophy, teaching Christianity as the true philosophy. He's found what he was looking for. And Christianity is the answer to the Greek quest. It belongs to the Hellenistic world. He continues to wear the short cloak, which was the equivalent to the academic gown at that time for professional philosophy. And he's still teaching philosophy when he is put to death, along with a number of other Christians. We have the shorthand notes of the trial, in which he is still teaching, and in which he explains again how he became a Christian. Now, there's several points here. One thing is, how did Christians operate in Hellenistic civilization and in the Roman Empire of this period? Christianity is not an allowed religion. You can't build churches and invite people to come. You can't stand in street corners and preach. How are you going to get the message across?